Hello, we are here today because you are part of an organization, a group of people who, with good skills and working together for a common purpose, have an enormous effect on the lives of many people. We have found in many cases, in many organizations, that when there is a problem, it can probably be traced to the wrong person in the wrong job. Of course, you can spend a lot of time and money training and hoping, but in the end, I believe it all comes down to job fit, fitting the right person in the first place to the job. That is what we are going to discuss today. We can take care of people problems in one of three places: the front door, which is the hiring process, on the inside, which is management, training, and coaching, and in the back door, which is firing the person. When companies prepare to purchase an expensive piece of equipment, much effort is used figuring asset value, cost, budgeting, expected life, etc. A person expected to spend years in a company has $1 million cost, yet the company is not prepared to analyze that decision with the same precision. When we purchase a television set, washing machine, or software, it comes with instructions. How nice it would be if we had those instructions to guide us in making that important people decision. Have you ever hired someone who did not work out? Do you know who are your best people? Do you know the minimum producers, who they are? Of course you do. But did you know this at the time they were hired? And an even better question is, do you know why your top performers are top performers and why the others are not top performers? Testing identifies those drastically important qualities you wish you knew about the person upon whom you are preparing to spend up to $1 million. Regardless of using state-of-the-art procedures for reviewing resumes, checking references, and interviewing, you should take advantage of accurate job fit prediction. We are going to show you how to do that. In our work, we look at 4 elements that comprise the hiring process, selection component: organization fit, skill and knowledge, attitude, and job fit. These 4 areas combine the subjective and objective components that go into the decision process. Many of us, as humans naturally do, rely too much on gut feel in judging people. It helps significantly to utilize both subjective and objective components in our process. Organization fit is a determination of whether the candidate will fit in with the corporate or organization culture and environment. This is a gut feel area and is not difficult to ascertain, particularly in the personal interview. Skill and knowledge is a little more difficult to ascertain. Based on accurate previous employment history and achievement, it is critical to correctly ascertain the candidate's specific role in the achievement being reported. When someone says that sales increased so much or fundraising increased so much during their reign, we need to ascertain their specific role in the activity. Attitude can be difficult to ascertain. A person may have the skills and the job fit, but for whatever reason may have a bad attitude. Nonetheless, we need to try as best we can to determine their attitude. And finally, job fit. Job fit is a measurement of mental abilities, motivations, and behavioral traits, and the strength of each trait in comparison to a benchmark for the job. It must be conducted with an instrument of proven reliability and validity. This is the objective part of the hiring process that balances the subjective part, and this is what we are going to discuss now. People are the greatest variable to the profitability and productivity of any business. What happens when we match the right person to the right job? First of all, performance increases. We avoid a bad customer connection. We get our money's worth. Morale is better. It's a manager's dream, and by that I mean if managers have people who are good at their jobs and doing well and performing, then their job is much easier. And lastly, turnover reduction. You know, most companies don't have ways of looking at turnover. They don't understand how big their turnover expense is. If turnover appeared on profit and loss statements and on balance sheets, many companies would gasp. So turnover is a big thing, and by hiring the right person, our turnover expense goes down significantly. This is a graph that shows how the more an employee is suited to the task, the easier it is to manage that employee. And you, as a manager, certainly want this to happen. The selection process for most organizations includes a variety of items. First, you post the job, you process applicants, you look at resumes, you look at references and skills and interviewing, and then you try and fit the right person to the right job, and then you make the hiring decision. Basically, there are subjective and objective items that we use in making the hiring decision. Subjective is sometimes referred to as gut feel. You have a good feeling about the person, you like them, and so you tend to want to hire them. In many cases, people want to hire people who are like themselves, but that's not always the best thing to do in making a hiring decision. Today's objective consists of why you're using an assessment. We're going to talk about the total person assessment that you are using. We're going to talk about the benchmark and how that fits into the system. And then we're going to talk about how to understand the results. Have you ever made a conscious decision to hire a non-performer? Have you ever purposely hired somebody that you knew was not going to work out? Do you wish that you could have known more about the person at the time you hired them? Well, we don't always have a crystal ball, and that's why it's important to have as much intelligence as we can at the beginning of the process. Human beings do not come with a set of instructions. Here we see an iceberg. And of course, the tip of the iceberg are the things that we normally see in the hiring process. Resumes, references, education, previous employment, and then the interview, their appearance, and so on. But look beneath the iceberg and look at all of the things that we do not see. Their work habits. Are they stressed? Are they alert? What is their communication skill and ability? Are they a slow learner? Are they creative? Are they competitive? Are they a leader? These are things that we typically do not see in resumes and interviews. Typically, people put into resumes what they want you to see, and they always put in things that are good. Also, in this day and age, people know how to interview. Some people even take lessons in how to interview. So obviously they are pretty skilled at telling you the things that they want you to hear. But what we're really interested in are all of these things that are below the tip of the iceberg. The assessment that you are using measures the total person. And by that we mean this is not just a personality test. This is a test that measures three basic areas: mental abilities and competencies, motivation and interest, and core behavior. The features of your assessment are, first, it is quantifiable and comparable. This means we can compare one person against another with accurate information. It's valid and reliable. Validity means, are we measuring what we say we're measuring? And reliability means, can we rely on the answers that we receive in the report? The assessment is company specific for job fit. And by that, we mean that we use benchmarks from your top performers to make sure that we are fitting that applicant to a particular job. It is non-fakeable. There's individual test validity, which tells us whether we can rely on the answers to the assessment. There's a job suitability score that shows you how they compare to other people that are applying for the same job. There is no subjectivity or bias in your assessment. And what this means is there's no gender bias, there's no invasion of privacy, it is completely gender-free and completely legal. You receive immediate management feedback, which means the report is immediately ready as soon as someone finishes taking the assessment. And lastly, And what is really nice about your assessment is that it provides interview questions based on how the person scores against the benchmark so that you can conduct an intelligent, targeted interview asking the right questions to determine the things that you want to know about that person. I mentioned the benchmark, and this is what we use to make sure that we are fitting the person to the specific job that you have posted. The benchmark is created from top performers in the job in your company. We look at the traits, the abilities, and the skills of the person who is a top performer, and we use those to create the benchmark to compare that to the person who is applying for the job. This keeps us from making the bad hiring decision. This shows us how your candidate is similar to top performers, and it shows us the areas of job fit that we need to further explore, typically in the interview. The first section of the report deals with mental abilities. This deals with reasoning, spatial skills, and verbal skills. This is where we measure reasoning, how the person reasons with new information, how fast their brain works, how fast they learn. Can they handle many things at once? Do they have strategic thinking? These all come under the heading of mental abilities. We are not specifically measuring a person's intelligence. We are measuring the things that are important to the job. Certain jobs require certain mental abilities, and we need to match the person's mental abilities to that which is required in the job. The report contains many pages. This is the page that shows the scores. What you see in the green bars is the benchmark. If a person scores inside the green, this means that they are scoring inside the benchmark, and their score is acceptable because this is what we are looking for. The first section is the ability section. The ability section consists of 4 scores. The first score is general abilities, and that's really an average score from the 3 scores below it. The 3 scores below it are the items that we're concerned about. Working with numbers, you see that the person scored a 3. This is outside the benchmark and is a lower score than what we are looking for. We want the person to score 5, 6, or 7. What this means is they do not compare to the top performers in this category. This means they do not have the reasoning ability and the math ability and the ability to work with numbers and figures and data, including financial data, that we are looking for. The second, working with words, deals with a person's ability to communicate, a person's ability to reason and communicate that reasoning in writing. And here again, the person scored a 5. We wanted them to score a 6 to an 8 because that's where our top performers score. The last area in the ability section, called working with shapes, is really what we call strategic thinking. Strategic thinking, in many aspects, could be the most important score in our assessment, depending upon the job. Strategic thinking means the ability of your brain to handle many things at once, to be able to understand relationships, and to be able to look into the future. In other words, if this happens, and this happens, then this will happen. So it's our ability to really make sense and intelligence of what's going on so that we can do the right thing. And again, this person did not score within our benchmark. So based on the ability section, this candidate is not looking good. The next section is motivation and interests. This deals with what you want in a job and what you like in a job. The first is working with people. The question is, how much do you want a job where you work with people? The higher you score means the more you want a job where you work with people. This person scored a 7. They're within the benchmark. This means we know that they like working with people, and this is what we're looking for. The scores of 1 to 10 are based on a bell curve. A bell curve means that on the whole population, if you get a score of 4 through 7, you are within 2/3 of the population. In other words, 2/3 of the population are average and will receive a score of 4 to 7. If a person scores a 1 or a 10, this means they're within 2.5% of the population. So typically scores of 4 through 7 are considered average, and this particular score of 7 is on the high side of average. It's within our benchmark, and it tells us that our candidate likes working with people. The second is working with data. How much do you want a job where you work with data? Obviously, if you're in a financial institution, it's important to like working with data if you're going to be in that type of a job. The third item is working with things, and this means how much do you like working with inanimate objects, whether it be fixing a sink or driving a tractor, working on a computer, or things of that nature. In this case, our candidate is within the benchmark in all 3 categories. The next section is the personality section. The personality section consists of 4 major components. What we do is we use the words on the right-hand side, and you see that there are 4 items in bold: independent, conscientious, extrovert, and stable. Each of these 4 items is broken down into 2 sub-items. So the independent score is broken down by competitiveness and assertiveness. The independent score is 8, but it's composed of the competitive and assertive score. Actually, in this case, the scores are rounded up, so in reality, the scores of 7 were really something more than 7.5. So let's talk about the individual scores in each section. Measure how the person is independent in terms of doing their job. Competitiveness, in which this person scored a 7, means I want to win. We are measuring their need to win and their need to achieve. The higher the competitive score, the higher is the need to achieve, and the higher is the need to win. Obviously, in a sales job, this becomes more important. In a team job, this becomes less important. So competitiveness means how much does the person want to win and want to achieve. Now, there are other items that affect competitiveness, and we're going to talk about those later. The next score, the assertive score, measures how much the person wants to be in charge. How much they are basically saying, leave me alone, I want to do the job, let me do it my way. Typically, managers need to be somewhat assertive, but if somebody scores a 10, then they're probably going to be a dictator. So we usually don't like to see 10s in assertiveness. We usually like to see scores that are in the 7 area, because this means that they are going to manage people without letting them run all over themselves. The next area is conscientious. Conscientious has to do with rules and change and order. The more a person scores on the right, the more they like rules, the more they don't like change, the more they like order. The more a person scores on the left, the more they are open to change, the more they like to do things differently, maybe even every time. This is important in the particular job, so we need to pay attention to the scores. This person scored a 5 in conventional. Conventional means they need rules and standard procedures. Because the person scored a 5, it means they're within the benchmark. It means that sometimes they are open to change and open to new ways of doing things, and other times they're content not to be open to change and new ways of doing things. The person scored a 5 in organized, and this means that sometimes they like change, sometimes they like structure, sometimes they don't. Typically, people that score in the middle, as this person did, are what we are looking for, but again, it depends on a particular job. There are certain jobs that absolutely are rigid in terms of how they need to be accomplished, and so we would want people to score more on the right. The next area is extroversion. This is where we see how a person needs to draw energy from others and how they build relationships. This person scored a 10 in extrovert, and their two subscores are a 9 and a 10. Group-oriented means your need to be around other people and your need to have other people involved for you to accomplish your means, which is another way of saying that you have a need for relationships and a need to be working with people. Before, we talked about whether or not you liked working with people. This section talks about your need for other people. This person scored a 9. The benchmark is 6 to 8. So is this a problem? Well, probably not. It's probably something that we would like to look at in the interview, but it's probably not a problem. We can certainly say that this person needs to be working in a group. This is not the kind of person that you're going to want to put in a cubicle and have them sit by themselves for most of the day. The next trait is outgoing. This is where we see whether a person enjoys risk and stimulation and how they deal with repetitive tasks. A person that is outgoing is a person that absolutely has to have relationships in order to accomplish what they're doing. You know people who are outgoing, and this is what we're looking for. Now, some jobs, we want somebody that's outgoing. Some jobs we don't. In this case, the person scored a 10. This may be a red flag because if a person is too outgoing and too much of an extrovert, they may spend too much time talking about gossip and not enough time doing their work. Plus, they may keep other people from doing their work. The next component is stability. This is the emotional component of the assessment. People who are poised, and this person scored a 9, means that they accept adverse situations. They take life as it comes. When something bad happens, they deal with it, they accept it, they don't get excited, they don't get upset. The next trait is relaxed. This is a very good measure of drive and sense of urgency. Drive and sense of urgency are actually the engine that makes you do the things that you do. Before we talked about competitiveness. Let's use an example of somebody who's really competitive, maybe they're an 8, and their relaxed score is a 9. This is a person who really wants to win, but they may not have the drive and the sense of urgency to accomplish that. An example of drive and sense of urgency is thinking of a person driving home at the end of the day. Imagine a salesperson driving home. The person that has a normal drive and sense of urgency, like a score of 5 or 6, they're thinking, what can I do tomorrow to make this sale? What can I do tomorrow to turn this situation around? What can I do to make this work? The person that's a 9 or 10 in drive and sense of urgency is driving home thinking, I wonder what's for dinner. This is a very critical trait, and it has to be looked at in connection with other traits like competitiveness, and it has to be looked at in terms of the benchmark to see how critical this is. This is certainly something that if a person scores outside the benchmark, you want to cover this in the interview. So here again, we see the complete picture of the personality section and the scores. The item on the bottom is called social desirability. Social desirability is a score that tells us whether somebody is trying to cheat on the test, make themselves look good, or in some way show us that we can't rely on the answers that they have given. There are many things that we measure within the assessment to tell us whether somebody's trying to make themselves look good, trying to fake their results, trying to answer questions the way they think they're supposed to answer. These are exaggerated answers, too many undecided answers, too many erratic answers, and too many omitted answers. Typically, when you see a score of 9 or 10 in social desirability, it tells us that a person is trying too hard to show you that they are socially desirable, which means they think they are making themselves look good. When you see a score of 9 or 10, yes, it means that they want to be liked and socially desirable, but it also means that you should look a little further in their background and in their references, because typically a person that scores a 9 or a 10 is probably hiding something in their past, and you need to get to the bottom of it. So a score of 9 or 10 in social desirability is a red flag. Conversely, when you see a score of 1 in social desirability, this means that the person is absolutely frank with their answers. They don't care too much about whether they are liked or not. They don't care too much about how they are seen by other people. They are basically very frank with their answers. On the score sheet at the lower right, you will see a job suitability score. The job suitability score is simply an algorithm that the computer measures how close the person comes to the benchmark. If you see a job suitability score of 80%, that means that they are 80% predicted to be successful in that job. Or another way of saying it is, they are 80% suitable to the job and fit the job. You simply use this score as a way of comparing candidates. You cannot use this score to make a hiring decision, because a person can have a score of 80%, but they can be very low in one particular score, like competitiveness, that really will ruin their candidacy. So the job suitability score is typically what many companies look at as a first sign of whether they want to continue with this candidate and move forward with an interview. Really, the purpose of the assessment is for you to make the decision as to whether or not you want to bring this person in for an interview. The assessment is your filtering process. Most companies use a score of 80 as a cutoff point. If someone scores 80 as a job suitability score and they don't have any other red flags, they probably are worthy of an interview. But you need to make the decision of whether or not to interview the person based on the total scores, not just the job suitability score. Here is how we read the report. On the back page, or sometimes the next to the last page, you see a section that says validity. This tells you whether the test is valid and whether the person has answered the questions that they were supposed to answer, so that we can make an adequate determination that the assessment is correct and that we can rely on the answers. The validity section will tell you if the assessment is not valid. The job suitability score is the next thing you'll look at. That's the percentage job suitability on the lower right hand of the score sheet. The next thing you want to look at is any asterisks that appear next to a trait, because that tells you that the person scored outside the benchmark. Next, you want to look at critical factors. These are factors where a person's score may be so low that you're just going to knock them out of the process. And finally, you want to look at the interview questions that are suggested to you. The interview questions are based on how a person scores compared to the benchmark, and they are designed to help you construct an intelligent interview. Targeted interviewing is very important. Based on the assessment, there are a lot of questions that you don't need to ask. If you're looking for somebody that's competitive and they score high in competitiveness, you don't need to waste your time asking questions about how competitive they are. You know they're competitive. You need to spend time looking at the areas in which they fall outside the benchmark. Our suggestion for interviewing is that you do competency-based behavioral job fit interviewing. Competency-based means you're going to interview them based on the traits that we have measured in the assessment. Then you're going to interview them based on the competencies and skills that are needed for that job. Behavioral means you're going to ask them questions such as, tell me, in your last job when you had a situation where you had to fire an employee, how did you handle it? That is a behavioral type of a question. These are all designed to determine a person's job fit. And lastly, you certainly want to make decisions in the interview about company fit. This includes items such as, do they walk and talk the way you want? Do they dress the way you want? Do you feel that they will fit into the company culture the way you want? There are some legal implications of using the assessment. First of all, the assessment keeps you out of legal trouble. Because you are treating all people in the same level in the hiring process the same, you are not discriminating against them. Therefore, your hiring decisions are being based on the same traits with each person. You cannot use an assessment to discriminate against people, which means if you have 5 finalists for a job, you cannot use the assessment to discriminate someone in or out of that job. You must treat everyone the same. Also, the assessment, for legal reasons, is proof that you hired somebody based on job fit. You should never tell someone they were hired or not hired based on the assessment. You should never show a candidate their assessment, and you should never tell them how they did on the assessment. This is purely to protect you because you don't want them coming back to you and saying, you didn't hire me because of the assessment. And this brings us to the next point of using the assessment in the hiring process. Typically, the assessment should be no more than 1/3 of the hiring decision. You want to make your hiring decision based on the skill that you determine, based on the company and culture fit, and on job fit. The assessment is job fit. So you never want to show a candidate their assessment. You never want to tell them how they did, and you never want to tell somebody that they were hired or not hired based on their assessment. The best companies have the best people.